Morning, Meg. Morning,
Good
Rob.
morning. Good morning.
Oh, this should be pretty much.
Whoops.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, isn't this a presentation? Very visual.
I came across the table from a woman and then carrying out her.
She I don't know about wearing black.
We bought a
What was the name of the person?
person's name.
It's a different
strain.
Yeah.
But the funny thing was, before I became ill, we were going to go out to see friends for dessert.
To just get me down.
But those are over here for the
I think I'll put him
also the photographs.
so look too messy.
Whole thing got too epidemic.
Paula, could you please call the front desk, Paula?
You're fine in the morning, you see your doctor a couple hours later, and by afternoon you're dead. So that's Thursday morning, I was sick, the dog, and I'm lying in bed with a fever.
But the interesting thing was that
All I could think of was the tape of the show, the wrong week.
I've heard others that have had flu shot.
I'd like to start off by saying that you don't need to do all this to make a report. You don't need all these pictures, you don't need the slides, you don't need all the books. But as you know, one thing leads to another, which it did in my case. Several years ago, I chose Chinese painting for my report, and it ended up that I needed to put 4,000 years in 1 hour. You'd think I would have learned my lesson, but this time I kind of expanded again. I promise you, and I'm promising myself, next year will be one artist, one book, 1 hour. That's what I promise.
Meg, I do tell people about that color.
This was Xeroxed at Pip down in Rocky Hill, $1.50 for a picture. Well, it was $3 for the top because it was 2 pages. That's a wonderful thing to know about. Well, having become that involved, I wanted to share it with my family. So Robbins is taking the video, and I hope you don't mind. My report today will be about Jacob Lawrence, a 20th century African-American artist. And the pictures in the front and the books are mostly about him. However, as I said, in the process of reading about Jacob Lawrence, I got interested in all the African-American artists, and so the overflow is over there. This is Henry Ossawa Tanner, the one I'm going to report on next year, one book, one artist, and his famous picture of the banjo lesson. We can thank Peg for Horace Pippin, this little article, and Keith for the Victorian interior by Horace Pippin, who lived 1888 to 1946. Here was an exhibit of 2 centuries of Black American art a few years ago that I saved. John Biggers, there's a similar mural in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. This book of God's Trombones by James Weldon Johnson has wonderful illustrations by Aaron Douglas. You might like to look at that. This American Visions, that was the movie series, has a few things about Black Americans in it too. Now, I was especially interested in what Janice McKesson brought. This is about an exhibit of art from the South, 1930 to 1946. Interestingly, it doesn't tell which are the black artists and which are the white artists, which I think probably is an improvement from the old days when there were always separate exhibits for whites and blacks. But I couldn't tell which was which except for a couple that I recognized their names. What if you had the goal of becoming an artist and you were not allowed to enter any art museum or could not get accepted in any art school, or others believed you had no talent because of your skin color? These were some of the special problems during the 19th century endured by African Americans if they wished to become artists. Opportunities for study and careers have gradually improved, though roadblocks still remain. I read this book, A History of African American Artists. I saw it first at the Brooklyn Museum. Remember on our trip? It was $85, so I didn't buy it. But as luck would have it, our Wethersfield Public Library owned a copy. So we have great libraries here. It was about 500 pages of reading, but I enjoyed it very much. In the book, I was amazed to hear about some of the struggles that the black artists had in trying to become successful. For example, one artist was not permitted into the building where he was to receive an award. Another found that the grant she had received for European study was withdrawn when they found out she was black. However, in spite of it all, many have succeeded. Later this morning, I'm going to report on Jacob Lawrence, an African American who did become highly successful as an artist. But before that, I'd like to do two things. First, a general history of African American art. Second, slides showing samples of a wide variety of paintings and sculptures. And then finally, my report on Jacob Lawrence. To begin with, we all know that art had reached high levels in Africa. A few examples being the Benin statues and masks and other ceremonial items. This would be a wonderful report for somebody to do. So they must have brought skills and talents with them when they came to America. There are records in the South that some slaves, instead of going to the cotton fields to work, specialized in carpentry or wrought iron railings or sewing quilts. There was little, if any, drawing or painting recorded. Among freed slaves and their descendants, there arose a few artists. In spite of prejudice against them and few opportunities to study, some did indeed succeed during the 19th century. They tended to paint subjects and styles similar to white artists. Probably they thought that would sell best, such as portraits, romantic landscapes, and religious pictures. I'll show you some in my slides soon. As we move into the 20th century, things improved. There were a few art schools that accepted blacks as students. However, their work still generally was not accepted in museums, exhibits, or galleries, so they did not become well known. Only a very few could make enough sales to make a living in art. Some even moved to Europe, where there was less prejudice. However, several things happened between 1920 and 1960 that led to quite dramatic developments in both the black and white communities. First, the Harlem Renaissance during the 1920s and 30s. The participation of black soldiers in World War I and their return was combined with large migrations of Southern blacks to the North, resulting in many seeking new futures. There was a kind of rebirth or renaissance in Harlem and in other cities where blacks were eager to redefine themselves as African Americans and find their role in a white society. It was an exciting time of self-discovery in Harlem, where groups met for discussion and mutual support. There was an explosion of creativity in jazz and other music, the theater, dance, painting, sculpture. They began to have local exhibits of artwork, but they remained relatively unknown outside the black community. Second, about the same time, the Harmon Foundation was established. A group of white philanthropists encouraged black artists through special awards and arranged for traveling exhibits. Some of the black colleges purchased African American art and also had some traveling exhibits co-sponsored with the Harmon Foundation. Third, the next significant development became the art projects of the WPA. Remember that? During the Depression. For the first time, black artists as well as white could have steady jobs for their 18 months as they worked on public murals and other art. Fourth, then came the GI Bill of the 40s and 50s after World War II. Returning black soldiers had opportunities to pursue their education in art as well as other subjects. Since the 1960s, the field of art continues to open up for African Americans, though there still is need for more equal recognition. Discussion by black artists begun during the Harlem Renaissance still continues. Joined by philosophers, writers, and intellectuals, they discuss the roles of African American art and artists. Should art be for aesthetic purposes only? Or should it promote the cultural and social goals of African Americans? Should there be a special black style? What relationship does experience have in relation to art? I'm going to show you some samples of African American artwork, and I think you'll see there's a variety of answers to those questions. So we'll move things around here. How is that? Everybody there? Let's see. These slides are shown somewhat in the order in which the painting or sculpture was created. They're the works of 20 or so African American artists over a period of almost 200 years. I have to explain about the slides. The good slides came from Wadsworth Athenaeum, which are slides of items they have at the museum. The other slides, which you'll see kind of are crooked and not exactly perfect, those are the ones I did on our back porch one windy day. This is a portrait of Mrs. Thomas Everett and family, painted in the style of white artists around 1800. It was painted by Joshua Johnston, who is believed to have been a free African American living in Baltimore. He also did individual portraits, and they have found 80 that seem to be in his style. But research continues to find more documentation about his life. Recollections of Italy was painted by Robert Duncanson in 1864. This is at the Wadsworth Atheneum. It is in the Hudson River School style, a calm, glowing, classical painting. Duncanson lived in Cincinnati, where he was very fortunate to be accepted by the white artists, and also had a wealthy patron who asked him to make murals for his house. He did other murals and many paintings of the Ohio River. The banjo lesson, painted in 1893, is probably the most famous painting by Henry Ossawa Tanner. It's a genre scene showing blacks in realistic, worn style rather than as comical figures as they were often drawn by whites. Notice the special lighting surrounded probably grandfather and grandson. In his later years, Tanner moved to Paris, where his race was no bar to acceptance. There he received international fame, as well as being a mentor to other African American artists who spent time in Paris. He also did many religious paintings. This is at the Atheneum. This is the Virgin and Child, and his work continued to have a special use of light. Also, though basically realistic, there are some abstract elements. For instance, Jesus is shown as a little wisp on the bed with a tiny halo over him. A Bit of Romance on Hubert Street was painted by Alan Rohan Crite in 1937 and is also in the Wadsworth Atheneum. He was a resident of Boston and painted many such scenes in the Boston neighborhoods, which have now gone because of urban renewal. The city of Boston so much appreciated his documentation of these areas that they named a square and a museum after him. The painting is typical, showing brownstone buildings, somewhat aging, as a background for people, and includes the two on a bicycle representing the Bit of Romance. I'm sorry you can't see these murals in color of the Amistad Mutiny. They were painted by Hale Woodruff. They are typical of the many murals and other art that were WPA projects. Woodruff was part of the Harlem Renaissance. The Negro Looks Ahead. This fine bronze sculpture was made by Richmond Bartay and is also in the Wadsworth Atheneum. Bartay was one of the artists of the Harlem Renaissance. This sculpture was had a hopeful, optimistic feeling. Bartay was very popular across the country during the 30s and 40s. In this sculpture of a copper mask, Sergeant Johnson shows the classic simplicity of African features. It is an example of the influence of African styles on the work of some of the African American artists. Domino players. In 1943, Horace Pippin painted the dominoes players, which reflects his Negro heritage and his love of home, as does the Victorian interior Keith Jones lent us. He had wounded his right arm in World War II, but with great difficulty started to paint. Like Grandma Moses, he is called a primitive, or a naive, self-taught artist. Another of Horace Pippin's paintings is Holy Mountain. It reminds us of The Peaceable Kingdoms by Edward Hicks, and it represents Pippin's hope for peace and brotherhood and the end to racism. In this painting, Peasant Girl Haiti, Lois Mayu Jones tried to show a non-European standard of beauty. This is realistic, but it seems to show an inner feeling as well. According to the book, she painted on her honeymoon in Haiti. This is in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. There are two more paintings by the same artist, Lois Mayu Jones, and I chose these to show how African American artists, in many cases like whites, had changing styles. The one at the bottom is Jenny, which she painted in 1942, very realistic. The other one was painted 30 years later, after Lois Mayu Jones, an art professor, had spent some time in Nigeria. It is titled Ubi Girl, Nigeria, and certainly is very different in style. 30 years between those two paintings. Pieta. Usually we think of a Pieta as Mary grieving over Christ. However, by associating the crucifixion with racism, Charles Henry Alston in his Pieta radically changes the concept. The central figure looks up, appealing for help. The Lincoln Memorial is in the back. The foreshortened figure in the bottom is apparently dead. There are two more figures with rolled up sleeves showing they are laborers. One is the middle, holding the body. He's kind of hard to see, though you can see his arms. And the other on the right. The style relates to Cubism, and the theme is social protest. The same artist, Charles Henry Alston, had other themes, such as family, youth, and heroes. Here are black man, black woman on left, and family number 9 on right. They are in a flat style, quite different from his Pieta, though in simple and easily discernible forms. Necks are slightly long, as in African sculpture. Charles Henry Alston was an important figure in the African American art world, especially in Harlem, where he was an art educator and a mentor for many, including Jacob Lawrence, the artist I'm going to tell you about later. I already showed you the Amistad Mutiny murals by Hale, I missed something. By Hale Woodruff. This painting, Carnival, is quite quite a different style. It is very modern, with Cubist, Impressionist, and abstract influences, probably gained from his studies in Paris with a Harman Foundation grant. Some people see cats, others see costumed people dancing around. The title is Carnival. You may wish to think of it as just a colorful and lively design. You can see it in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. James Leslie Wells was an art professor. This painting of African fantasy is an example of his commitment to African art, which he found a source of inspiration and pride. Now, here's Dance of Salome, 1963, another picture by James Leslie Wells. It shows Salome in the center with the head of John the Baptist at her feet. A figure is showing moving in rapidly on the left, and another is on the right. Lots of motion in there, Pete. People moving around. It is influenced in color by German expressionism, and also by Cubism. Sure are different styles, aren't there? Here is the legendary Queen of Sheba, sitting on her throne while her faithful servant protects her from the scorching sun. The artist is Romaire Bearden, a very important black artist, as well as leader in African American art circles. He also is the co-author of African American Artists, which was my chief resource for today's report. As backgrounds for his paintings, Charles White used old wanted posters which had sought runaway slaves. He used them for this as a background for this grieving mother and child. This touched many people. He kept socially conscious art going in the 70s when many African American artists were turning to abstract. He did a lot of graphics, and of course more people could buy them because they were cheaper. So there are more of those around. Charles White's wife was another artist, Elizabeth Catlett. This beautiful sculpture, Seated Woman, is in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. The African American woman is the theme of her sculpture, done in marble, as this one, or bronze, or mahogany, cedar, or other woods. And she also did lithographs. This and the next four paintings are in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. Red Azaleas, Jubilee. Give you a feeling of azaleas? This shows Alma Thomas's love of color and its use in non-representational painting. Alma Thomas was a public school teacher for 35 years, and when she retired, she began a full career as an artist and became very well known in the Washington, D.C. area. This painting by Jack Whitten is called Einstein's Violin. I haven't been able to find the violin yet, but it's supposed to be there. The artist was appalled that the Nazis had stolen Einstein's violin. So he tried to replace it through this painting. He invented a new way of painting with chips of dried acrylic paint glued onto canvas. So he put a lot of acrylic paint on something else, and then he cut little square chips off and glued it on. That must have been very painstaking work. if Einstein ever got it. Huey Lee Smith had become discouraged because he had to work making Ford cars, because his pictures wouldn't sell in spite of awards and public recognition. In 1989, he painted Summertime. The rubble on the left symbolizes civilization in decay, but the two African American figures are looking out beyond the inequities of society over the calm water, showing ability to overcome problems. Notice how the two seem to support each other. This is called Band of Angels Weaving the Seventh World. It was painted in 1993 by John Biggers and is at the Wadsworth Atheneum. Almost everything in this large mural painting is symbolic of the time-honored values in the African community, which he also believes are the source of African American values too. Biggers became head of the art department at Texas State University for Negroes and has made many murals in Texas. Now, if we can have the lights. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I have some more. I'm glad, Keith, you're able to manage that little stair there. I think it's really a dangerous spot. Thank you.
I've lived with it.
Here we go. The final part of my presentation will be a report on Jacob Lawrence, which I will give you in a few minutes. However, while the projector is on and the lights are off, I'd like to show a few of his paintings so you can get a feel for his style. Here he is as a young adult in the 1940s. I also have some photos at later ages on the table, thanks to Kay. The Builders, the Family, done in 1974. It was the theme painting for a retrospective of Jacob Lawrence's work a few years ago. It shows a family in the front and construction workers behind. This contains much that is typical of his painting. The flat colors and the distortions of form and perspective are part of his lifelong style, related to Cubism and Expressionism, but really his own. Typically, too, it is tempera on paper. There is usually a feeling of movement, shown here by the walking people and by the climbing construction worker. This is not only a physical movement, but symbolically of people moving on to something new. In this case, the building of family and the building of a house. Jacob Lawrence often shows ladders and stairs. This is a painting of the revolt on the Amistad, currently in the movies and news. However, at the time of the painting, little was known about it. As part of Jacob Lawrence's interest in African American history, he painted this. Violent waves are shown at the lower edge. The figures are in violent combat as the Africans revolt to take over the slave ship. It is a mass of men, weapons, and blood. There's a lot of emotion in this as Lawrence tries to bring Black history alive. This painting shows a woman grieving over a lynching. Emotion and resignation, simply but powerfully shown It was painted on gesso board, tempera paint, and part of a series of the migration of Negroes from the South after World War II. Jacob Lawrence lived his teen and young adult years in Harlem. One of his most well-known paintings is "This is Harlem," painted in 1943. It is a very busy picture, capturing all the aspects of city life, yet it has a feeling of neighborhood, with people at the windows and adults busily moving along on the sidewalks among the playing children. Notice the billboards that indicate lunch, bar, beauty shop, funeral home. Also, the church on the left has a significant place. Notice that there are ladders here too. The fire escapes moving upward and across the painting. Lots of bright colors. It looks very much alive. At the same time as he was painting this, Robbins and I were living in another area in New York, where we moved after we were first married. It was an Irish neighborhood, but it had a similar feeling of city within a city. Neighborhood shops, settlement house, neighborhood theater, where young actors could come and we would go to see it free and just drop something into the collection plate. Lawrence liked to paint many aspects of street life. Here are blind beggars, the two tall figures, feeling their way along, somewhat impeded by a roving band of children who seem oblivious to the sightless couple's condition. This has both grim and playful aspects of city life. The mood in this painting, titled "Tombstones," is more solemn, not the carefree atmosphere of many of the other Harlem pictures. Some lean against the window sill, others hunch over on the stoop, or drag themselves up the stairs. A white crucifix and the tombstones, the tombstone sign, give a life and death spiritual feeling to the city scene. This was a sketch for a Munich Olympic Games poster. After Keith's talk about how motion is shown in pictures last week, this kind of painting has added interest for us. What a great show of exertion and exaggerated motion as the figures race along in their running strides. It also shows a triumph of the human spirit. Here is the self-portrait of Jacob Lawrence. He shows himself surrounded by the various aspects of his life as an artist. The tools show his feeling for the importance of good workmanship. The window looks out on a city scene, something that was such a central part of his work. Notice that even in his studio, he has stairs which he himself is standing on, as if still thinking about moving on to his new project. In an article that Peg lent me, there's a picture of Jacob Lawrence, a photograph of Jacob Lawrence in his studio, and it has this same red railing and stairs, so this must have really been just like his studio. Okay, now we are finished. So we can do the lights. Thank you so much, Pete. Unusual children's book about Jacob Lawrence, and I'm going to pass it around to you. I got it at the Children's Department of the Hartford Public Library. And what's so very special about it, it's full of little things that children could find in the pictures, activities related to it. So it's a real understanding of Jacob Lawrence's life and his kind of painting. And I'll just pass it around and trust it gets to everybody eventually. I stuck it. No, I guess is there a little yellow? There's one page that tells about his unusual way of painting faces, and I meant to put a little yellow tag in, but I didn't. Jacob Lawrence has been called one of the most artistic talents to develop in America. Almost from the beginning of his career, his works have been sought by museums and collectors. He was born in 1917 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, the son of Jacob and Rose Lawrence, who had migrated from the South. When his parents separated, his mother moved to Harlem with Jacob, age 13, and a younger sister and brother. This was the beginning of the Depression, and there was a lot of unemployment and poverty. However, teenage Jacob could somehow feel the excitement of the city, as shown later in his Harlem paintings. Mrs. Lawrence, afraid that her son would get in trouble in the streets, enrolled him in the arts and crafts program of a neighborhood settlement house. There, a young teacher and artist, Charles Henry Alston, his first mentor, set him to work with cheap poster paints and brown wrapping paper. He started painting geometrical shapes and designs. He also made city scenes in cardboard boxes. At that time, he knew he was going to be an artist. He dropped out of high school but spent much time at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, studying paintings and different styles. He became excited about what he called the magic of art. He also spent many hours in the library, where he became absorbed in American history. He was especially interested in the history of African Americans and thought it was unfair that little of their history was in the ordinary textbooks. Though the initial excitement of the Harlem Renaissance had somewhat faded, there were still quite a few black artists, poets, actors, writers, and historians living in Harlem. To me, it seemed like a wonderful support group for any young artist at that time. They encouraged him in his art and also in his study of history. Charles Henry Alston continued to be his mentor and gave him part of his own studio in which to work. He helped him to get a scholarship to study at the American Artist School in Lower Manhattan. When Jacob Lawrence was only 20 years old, he followed his interest in black history and painted his first historical series. The subject was Haiti and Toussaint Louverture, who led a revolt in Haiti. He painted in a narrative style. I can only think of it like comic strips, but painted, telling a story. And there were 41 gesso boards about this big, which he made for this series. His first big break came in 1939 when the Baltimore Museum of Art devoted an entire room to the series when he was only 22. In spite of this public recognition, Lawrence had major difficulty making a living and almost had to give up his dreams of an art career. At this point, another artist and sculptor, Augustus Savage, succeeded in getting him enrolled in the WPA project, which gave him $26 for 18 months and was a real turning point for him. Later, he received Rosenwald and Guggenheim fellowships, and he also continued to have encouragement from the other Harlem artists. During these early years, he developed a particular style, which actually became a lifetime one. First, he carefully drew his picture design on a gesso board or paper. The flat shapes were often exaggerated or distorted, as was the perspective. Then he filled in each shape with tempera paint in bold, solid color. The paintings were representational, also related to expressionism and cubism, but developed in his own way. And I was interested how he mixed up the blue he was going to use and then painted every blue spot that was needed on that picture. Or if he had 41 in a row, he would paint all the blue all the way through, so it would be a matching color all through it. And that was quite a thing to develop. He was such a prolific painter that I can't possibly cover his whole art career. I've instead prepared an outline for each of you, and I'll just elaborate on a few of the parts and show you some books I have. As you can see near the top of the page, Jacob Lawrence married Gwendolyn Knight, one of Augustus Savage's pupils, a talented painter in her own right. It appears to have been a long and happy marriage, and currently they reside in Seattle, Washington, where he has retired from a professorship in the University of Washington, which seems pretty amazing for someone who didn't graduate from high school. If you look at his art career, you will see that I've divided his work in two categories, starting with historical narratives on the top there, in Black history, American history in general, city life, Africa, builders, and murals. We'll start with the top category, historical narratives in Black history, which include the Toussaint Louverture series, which I've already mentioned. Then John Brown. All of his series are now in museums, but fortunately, some have been used as illustrations in children's books. Wethersfield Children's Department, these children's books, make use of some of the paintings that he did for those series in his early years. This is John Brown, One Man Against Slavery. It tells about John Brown, a white man who led an unsuccessful raid on Harper's Ferry, where he hoped to get weapons to arm the slaves in a revolt. I'll pass it around so you can take a look at it. There he is. Then we'll keep them all going in the same direction. I have over here, MB, pass out. That doesn't mean I'm going to faint. It means I'm passing this out. It does seem funny to see that here. This is the Great Migration. About the time of World War I, thousands of Southern blacks moved north with the hope of jobs and better life. Lawrence's parents were among them, and he has documented the hardships of the South, the migration by walking or by train, and then the sometimes difficult settling in the North. Is the light on this, so can you see it? Or here's a group going north. This group carrying all their bags, and look at the birds migrating too. That adds to the movement there. I'll just show you a couple of pictures here. He starts his series of 60 separate pictures with pictures of the South and showing reasons why maybe they wanted to migrate north. Here are children working in the cotton fields. And here they are getting on the train. There they are, sitting in the train. Can you see the smokestacks? This is when they were arriving in Chicago, probably wondering whether they could get jobs. Perhaps I better start this on the other side, because you'll never get a book. I think that Jacob Lawrence thought of this migration of the blacks from the South to the North after World War I as representing all kinds of migrations. The Irish, the Asians, the Hispanics, which still are happening while people try to move to a better life. Harriet Tubman was the woman who tried to help the blacks who were slaves in the South to get up north. Here she is perhaps explaining, oh, your life will be better up north. The faces on his pictures are very unusual, very full of expression. You can see how this child is looking with such intent on her story, and it's focusing on the faces. Here's somebody scrubbing the floor. See how big the hands are? This makes you think about how hard it is, and she's working with her hands to scrub the floor. So although it isn't an exact style, it tells more than if you have a small hand there. Well, let's see this one along. Now, if Myra and Peg could get up and get those books. So we're going to look at the cover now. This is Daybreak, A Time to Rest.
Oh, we have the same.
Yeah, you have the same. You have the same. So, Myra, you should show this. Just hold it up in front of that side. See how big those feet are? See how exaggerated they seem? It almost seems as though you should have this for a podiatrist. but actually, Harriet Tubman and the slaves walked all night. In the morning, it was daytime and time to rest. And I think if you'd walked all night long, that's how your feet would feel. So there are others lying down. I don't know if it's hay or grass that they're in. So you can both sit down for a second now, because the next book I have, see if somebody else would hold. Would somebody else hold this up? Just, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Thank you. I just wanted this. The one on the right. This is called Ordeal of Alice. And after you show it over here, you can show it over there for a while. Even though this was a time featuring the broad range of Americans, he had turned to have pictures not only of blacks but of others. He still felt the sorrows and anxieties of his race. This is during the 1950s and 60s. When he painted this frightening picture, Ordeal of Alice, he showed a little schoolgirl entering a white school, perhaps at Little Rock. She is bleeding from arrows and is surrounded somewhat surrealistically by hobgoblins of hate and masks of prejudices. You may have to see that later because I don't think you can see it, but it's a very scary picture, and he tries to get into the feeling of the child. All right, now you could just put that down, and we'll get Myra and Peg in. Now we want Harlem, number 6. Yeah. Have you got Harlem? Wonderful. Next, the category on city life. Most of these paintings were made in Harlem between 1937 and 1960. And I've already shown this is Harlem before in the slide. Now we'd like to move on to the next one, which is Palm Sunday. It's number 9. You can take it. Palm Sunday, which is the one on, let's see, it's on that side, yeah. Palm Sunday has religious context, showing the minister at the left relating to a small child, while some other figures are on the right. The book described it as a caring, religious group, but also as a colorful, cubistic revelry, full of arcs, ovals, and diamonds. As I looked at it, I thought of it as a stained glass window. On the next page, there are dreams. It's right at the other side. He did a number of paintings about dreams. Here is a young girl dreaming about a wedding. I guess she hopes it'll be hers. You can see the white veil around, and up there is a limousine and a young man. So that's a very happy dream she's thinking about. He did a number of those dreams. All right, Myra and Peg, you could both sit down now, take a little rest. Now that was hard. Now move on to the Africa category. Jacob and Gwendolyn Lawrence spent 6 months in Nigeria in 1964, and they both apparently did a lot of painting, but I couldn't find a sample. I think it's wonderful how they did their painting together. They really were a good artist couple. The next category is builders. This is a cabinet maker. See, here's his head, and he's holding the tools of his trade. Nails, and I don't know the name, I know a hammer, vice, all the different tools. And he did a number of these beginning around 1955 for at least 15 years. he called it his Builders series, and he sought to create a positive image of black people by showing their skills in various types of work. A shoemaker, a seamstress, carpenters, barbers. This print lent me by Peg is called Cabinet Maker, is one of the examples of the builders. Another example is Builders and Family, which was one that I showed you with the slides.
It's a really nice combination of the workman and the family.
Yes, yeah, that was nice.
Very nice.
Okay, Peg and Myra again. After becoming a professor, have you got theater up?
No, but that's studio.
So we want theater. It's in the middle. It's number 8. Maybe I didn't put some marker in it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
By number 8.
Yes.
Next, murals. After becoming a professor at University of Seattle in 1971, he was commissioned to do a number of huge murals in Seattle and at Howard University. He had always loved the theater, which I'm showing you now, marionettes at the bottom of it. And then there are a lot of strings going up that are the marionette strings, as far as I can figure it out. It seems unusual that the marionettes seem so small, but they are small, I guess. So he always found the theater exciting and made a series when he was younger in Harlem. And this is the Harlem series, but he also made a theater murals in Seattle. I wonder if any of you have seen any of his murals. As it says on the bottom of your outline, Jacob Lawrence also had an alternate career in art education, some part-time, and then from 1971 to 1983, full-time at the University of Washington in Seattle. He had many honors, including membership in the Academy of the Arts and Letters, and membership in the National Academy of Design. In closing, I'd like to show you again the studio at the end.
Meg, it's interesting that that's at Brooklyn. The studio is at Brooklyn Museum.
Yes, yeah,
So if we ever go to
have to go
Brooklyn,
there.
that's at the Brooklyn Museum.
This is the self-portrait of Lawrence in his studio. As you look at the painting again, see him standing there holding his brushes and tools of his trade, perhaps looking out of his window at a city scene. Then listen to him speak as I quote his words. My belief is that it is most important for an artist to develop an approach and philosophy about life. If he has developed this philosophy, he does not put paint upon canvas, he puts himself on canvas. I think the most important part of painting is the feeling toward a subject and what the artist wishes to say about it. And then another time he said, my pictures express my life and my experience. I paint the things I know about, the things I have experienced. The things I have experienced extend into my national, racial, and class group. So I paint the American scene.
What a wonderful record of that history he has made for the whole
Yes,
black
yeah,
populace.
yes, yeah.
Amazing.
He also made a series on American history in general. I meant to tell you about that, which featured common people in the historical scenes. So that's Jacob Lawrence, and you can look at the books or whatever.
Hey, I want to ask if that picture, see the picture of the theater where the marionettes,
Yes.
were all the people in that picture marionettes, or were they?
They look like marionettes.
And I wondered if that was the significance.
I don't know if there was significance.
I mean, the idea of the theater
It makes me think of
Yeah, I was wondering,
Ensor.
it does.
Doesn't it make you think of Ensor's paintings?
Yeah.